Welcome to the Thresholds of Reality, the podcast where we explore unexplained and mysterious events, phenomena, and legends. Today, I am joined by Mr. Scott Johnson, host of the "What Was That Like" podcast, and we're going to be talking about all the wonderful experiences, strange and perhaps terrifying experiences that he and his guests have experienced. And for that, strap in as we explore the edges of the unknown. Scott, welcome to the Thresholds of Reality podcast. We in our we're probably around 70 episodes. I don't know, close to 70 episodes.
Okay.
We largely have tackled paranormal, supernatural, kind of edge of the human experience type topics. But our very first episode was a true crime episode. And we talked about a case involving a girl I went to high school with. And still is an unsolved murder here in the state of Arizona. She and her boyfriend were out camping near Prescott, Arizona, and they were going to spend the night in the truck bed, and they never woke up. They were both found with bullets in their heads and never made it home. And that kind of things kind of has haunted us as you know, even as we've moved on to other topics, more delightful topics. But my question to you is, how did you get involved in exploring things like true crime or even just true events? How did that tickle your fancy enough to kind of make it your career?
Wow. I'm curious about that story. How long ago did that happen?
I think it happened back in 2005.
Okay. So it would be called a cold case now.
Oh, yeah. It's been like almost 20 years.
For sure. Man, that is it's so weird and sad that, that something like that can happen.
Maybe it was 2003.
Okay.
20-year case.
Well, I mean, hey, cases have been solved that were older than that, Somebody knows something and never know. But for me, I've been podcasting since 2012. I started a podcast for my computer business and was doing that pretty regularly. And then about 5.5 years ago, I just saw that or figured out that when I'm listening to podcasts, the ones that episodes that I really enjoy the most are ones where someone's telling a story. And I enjoy it even more if it's a true story, And so I thought, man, that would be really good to have more podcasts like that. So I looked around and I didn't see any other shows doing that, at least not the way I would want to listen to them or the way I would do it. And I already knew how to podcast, so I decided, okay, I'll do it myself. I'll make my own. And that was the first episode was July of 2018. And what really kind of triggered me into doing that is, there's a saying, I think it's from Maya Angelou or Angelo, what people will forget what you said, but they never forget how you made them feel. And that's what a story does. Stories are so powerful. And I remember specifically the time that I was hearing a particular episode, and it was so the story that was being told was from a friend of mine, was so emotionally moving to me. It just really struck me that, man, this is so powerful, and this is just a story. And so that's why I enjoy having people come on and tell stories that, it was something big that happened with them. That may have been something traumatic, good or bad, but I just love hearing people talk about stuff like that.
Yeah, the older I get, the more I'm fascinated by tales of human tragedy and triumph. It seems
Hmm.
like the people face darkness on a pretty regular basis, and hopefully we all only have maybe one or two of those types of experiences in our lives, but it seems like it's a pretty common element of the human experience to face tragedy and then to dig deep and find something of value there. Um, what are your favorite kinds of stories to explore?
I try to. Well, there's a lot of. There's several criteria that I use into determining. When someone pitches me their story, to determine if it would really be a good fit for the podcast. One thing is that I have to be able to verify the basics of what happened. You do that either through a police report or 911 audio or an online news article or a doctor's report, something like that that can just confirm not every detail, but just the basic the story that they're telling that it actually happened. And for me, the probably the biggest thing is that when people see this or when they hear this story, it's going to be something that it's not going to leave their mind for a while. Um, I name all of my episodes and using the same naming convention. I've got the guest name and then what happened. Like Brandon was dragged by a horse, or Emily was caught as a drug mule. And so I want people. You know how when you're on your phone, you subscribe to podcasts. I don't. I subscribe to a lot of podcasts, but I don't listen to every episode of every show. You kind of cherry pick, look at the ones look interesting, and I want people when they're scrolling their phone and they see a new episode and it has a title like that, like Dan was mauled by a grizzly bear. I want people to look at that and say, "Okay, I got to hear that story. What happened there?" And if it fits those criteria, there are a few types of shows or stories that I don't do, but other than that, if it's something like that that's going to really make people think, or in a lot of cases it makes them cry. It's just if it's going to be a powerful story, I think usually it'll be a good fit.
Yeah, one of my favorite activities is to cry while I'm driving. You definitely want to impair your ability to see
That's right.
and
That's right.
breathe while you're
No,
driving.
hey, I've had people. I've got a big Facebook group of podcast listeners, and we all talk about episodes and stuff like that. And when a new episode comes out, you wouldn't believe how many times the comments are, "I had to pull over," because you're right. You're bawling. You don't want to lose control, and then become my next guest.
Right. Sam was crying while listening to the What
Right.
Was I Like podcast. And had
Yeah.
to
You
pull
know
over.
what? I actually did an episode with a girl named Kennedy. And that's exactly what happened with her, but it was the most bizarre thing. She had just broken up with her boyfriend, and so she was in an emotional turmoil. She and a couple of her friends drove out to just, hang out for a while. They were coming back and they were talking, and she was driving and still crying and really upset, and she lost control of the car. And the car rolled, none of them wearing seatbelts. Her two friends got thrown to, opposite sides of the road into the field, but Kennedy was also thrown from the car, but she was thrown straight up and came back down on a power line and
Oh no.
was hanging from that power line by her broken leg. And she hung there for 45 minutes before they were able to get her down. They all survived, and she ended up losing the leg too.
Ow.
But
Oh man.
yeah. So you don't want to crying,
Yeah,
driving
don't
and
cry and drive.
crying. That's a bad combination.
That's a very serious bad combination. Okay,
Mhm.
so stories obviously are meant to they're structured to evoke a strong reaction, whether it's crying or an emotional reaction, or one that just maybe gets you excited and fired up. The kind of the hero's journey type thing. Oh yeah, I can overcome this adversity and really
Yeah.
do things. As you have been going for you said 150 over 150 episodes, right? What are the stories that really stand out to you as kind of the most powerful?
Well, I got really lucky on the very first episode. That story was with a young woman named Jen. She lives in Texas, and she was driving at night with her two young children, her daughters, and it was nighttime. She pulled into an intersection, not seeing the motorcycle that was approaching on her left, and he hit her car, and he ended up dying a couple of days later. And I was able to get the 911 audio for that, when the phone call that she made while she's in the road with him laying next to his motorcycle. And I mean, there's so much to unpack in a story like that. I mean, the guilt that she felt, even though it was ultimately determined that she wasn't charged, she wasn't at fault. Guilt, the financial burden of having to hire a lawyer and defend yourself, having to explain to your little children, mommy might go to prison. She was diagnosed with PTSD, and that was the very first episode. So, yeah, that one really stuck with me for a while, and it made me a better driver, even though she wasn't talking on her phone. And that was one of the things too. She said, I used to be one of those people that I would see an article in the paper, somebody got killed, and my immediate reaction is, oh yeah, that jerk. They were probably texting, but she wasn't doing any of that. So she now has kind of sees it from the other perspective, that, the person that caused the accident may not have been doing anything wrong. It could have just been an accident. And that's what the grand jury determined as well, because she wasn't indicted. So, yeah, that one stood out to me for a while. There's a bunch of them that the guest went through something tragic, but then turned it around to a positive. There's one of my early episodes was with a man who lost his 16-year-old son to an asthma attack. And when we recorded that episode, it was only about 6 weeks after it had happened. And I asked him, is this too soon? I mean, maybe you want to get some time and, grieve a little more or whatever. And he said, no, he wanted to do it then because his son, in dying, was an organ donor. And so now this man wanted to get that story out there everywhere he could to raise awareness about organ donation. And so that's why he wanted to. I mean, within 5 minutes of telling that story, he's crying. He's just lost his son. So, but that's kind of what I try to do for any of the episodes, even though they've gone through something really tragic or traumatizing, to turn it around. And now this person has a cause. They have a mission, and that's what we try to end on, is getting the word out, and so that what happened didn't happen in vain. It might save other people from going through the same thing.
Yeah, that's a really great thing to do, is to find that silver lining, but then also it's what they call inductive reasoning, right? Where you're taking kind of the particular and then spreading it out to a more general application.
Mm-hmm.
You mentioned the story about the car accident and wanting or helping you become a better driver. Nothing has helped me become a better driver than watching a show called Canada's Worst Drivers, which is
you don't want to be on that show, right?
It was it's kind of a comedy reality show.
Mm-hmm.
If you can demonstrate good driving ability, then you get to leave the show and keep your driver's license, and then the losers, they have to surrender the license. But nothing helped me better than watching them and their terrible driving skills. But yeah, absolutely, these things tales of trauma, tales of suffering and overcoming always tend to bring a little bit of inspiration, sometimes a lot of motivation to the human spirit. We've had a few people on to talk about their near-death experiences.
Mm-hmm.
And those one guest in particular had 3 near-death experiences in the period of about 12 or 15 years, and he's written books about them and the things that he's learned, and so he's now taking these terribly tragic experiences and then sending them out into the world with the lessons that he's learned, and that's always a very powerful thing because it is attended by these very traumatic experiences. But you
those
talk
people
about
always find those interesting for sure. Yeah.
Yeah, but you talk about other things besides just tragedy, right? You also talk about tales of great success, right?
Yeah. We do some fun stuff. It seems like my listeners really enjoy a good mix. I mean, there's a lot of dark stories for sure, but one of the earliest episodes I did was with a woman who was traveling for business, and she got to the hotel. Some of her coworkers were supposed to be there, so she sent a text message saying, "Hey, where is everybody? I want to hang out." And she texted it to the wrong number, and the person that she texted it to replied and said, "Hey, this is the wrong number, but if I were there, I'd hang out with you." And so they just started chatting, just kind of silly and stuff. 3 years later, they got married.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, and they still have they have that framed picture of their initial text message, So that's that's a fun one, and there's every once in a while we try to throw a happy one in there or just something unusual. I've done a few episodes where someone has a really unusual job. Like I had one, I forget what his name was, Kevin, I think. He's a lighthouse keeper, and that's what he does. He spends his time on this little island, cutting the grass and making sure the lighthouse light bulb is running, and that's what he does. And he's alone on the island. The odd thing is he's married. He hardly ever sees his wife because she's not on the island with him. He's
Really?
there. Yeah, it's. But I mean, just to talk about, what do you do all day? How did you get a job like this? Stuff like that. And people kind of enjoy hearing stuff like that too.
Did he start out in the Navy and then they?
I don't know. I don't think he had military experience prior to this.
They were just looking for somebody.
Yeah, it's been a few years since I did that episode. I'd have to listen to it again to remember how he ended up in that position.
Yeah, I'll have to check it out. That's fascinating.
Then the fun thing is he's got all day. He can listen to podcasts all day, So it's there's some advantages to it, I guess, as long as you're not the type that can't stand loneliness because he's just there by himself.
Oh yeah, well, I got stuck up on my roof yesterday. I was trimming some tree branches, and I put the ladder in the wrong place. I got stuck on the roof for about half an hour, and I was like, "It's over. This is my life now."
Wow.
So I had to go get some help and try and find somebody to help me move the ladder so I wouldn't break my legs coming down.
Did you have your phone with you?
I didn't. I was charging, and then
oh man,
my wife was like, "Are you ever going to trim that tree I asked you to trim?" And I was like, "Oh, okay. I guess I'll go do it right now." So. And I didn't have my phone with me. I ended up laying on my stomach and kind of waving upside down at the people inside the house to try and get their attention. And finally got my wife's attention, and she came and helped me. But after 30 minutes, I was like, "I'm all alone." I was like, "This is my life now. I can't believe it."
Kind of like on Gilligan's Island,
Yeah, exactly. Well, so when we have guests come on, we get some strange tales. We've had some strange tales on here. What are some of the really strange tales that kind of haunt you today?
Well, I can tell you the strangest story that I've had on. This was with a young man who used a pseudonym. I verified his story, but he still wanted to remain anonymous for it. He used the nickname Shiny, and he experimented with cannibalism. And for a lot of my listeners, when they discover the show, they download all and they listen to all the past episodes. But I still have some people that say, I've listened to all your shows, but that's the one I can't listen to because they have this picture in their mind of what it's going to be, and it's really not that bad. But this guy he had a group of friends, and they would all have they'd have conversations like what would you do, or and the question came up, if you could taste human flesh and it was legal and ethical and maybe even healthy, would you do it? And yeah, sure, we'd do that, knowing that it would never happen. Well, this guy was in a motorcycle accident and he had to have his foot amputated. And when he's leaving the hospital, he said, hey, can I have my foot? And they still had it in a refrigerator, and he had to sign legal disclaimers and stuff like that, but they gave him his foot. And so he got home and he started calling his friends saying, hey, remember that conversation we had? What do you think? And they were all up for it. So he had about 10 friends over. One of his friends is a chef, and they came over and they had what they call foot tacos. And it wasn't like a whole meal, but like a 2-inch square, just a slice. They cooked it up with seasoning and all kinds of stuff, just like a regular meal. And I asked him, what does it taste like? And his answer was, it tastes like heritage pork. And I don't really even know what that tastes like, but maybe some people do. But but at the end, he kind of turned it around on me. He said, well, what about you? What if you were presented with this opportunity? And I said, well, I'm vegan, so I'm off the hook, or so I thought. And he said, no, hang on a second. People are vegan because the animal can't give consent.
Right.
But in this case, full consent was given. Nobody was killed. And it was all, it was all fine. And I said, I still wouldn't do it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I actually remember reading about, I don't know if it was him. I mean, it sounds very similar to the story I read, where
it could have been. He did an AMA on Reddit.
That's where I saw.
That's how I found him. I contacted him and said, hey, this would be a cool story if you want to come on the podcast.
Yeah, and I think I remember there being a picture of the foot.
Yeah, he had pictures of everything. Yeah, the foot and the skillet with while it was cooking up, and all of his friends. We blurred their faces and stuff. But
yeah, I think I would fall in the camp of no thanks. I'm not. I mean, especially foot meat. Like, it's gotta be foot.
Yeah. I hope I'm never that hungry.
Yeah, I remember in Mexico, I lived in Mexico for a short time, and then one of the things that you do is you go and you have tacos at the street taco vendors, and in Mexico they tend to use a lot more of the animal than we're used to. And this guy says, "Oh, this is a taco of machito." And I was like, machito, macho, that little macho. It's like, what is this? What does that mean? And he said, well, it's the penis. It's the bull's penis. And I was like, oh, okay, I'll skip the machito. We'll go somewhere else.
It's just another part of the animal, right?
Well, I wasn't quite ready to embrace that much of the culture,
Yeah.
I had a little bit of hesitation there. But there was another gentleman in our group another American gentleman who wasn't as good at kind of putting those words together. And he was like, yeah, let's do it. Let's try them on. He found out after what it was. And he was like, oh, well, whatever. It was fine.
Too late now. Yeah.
Yeah, too late now. Anyway. So cannibalism, that's a good one. I guess I'm not going to try and one up you, but I do want to let you know, you might want to have this gentleman on your podcast. We had a fellow on our show. He was supposed to talk to us about a topic called spectrophilia, which is having sex with ghosts. And halfway through the conversation, he switched to tell us about his super soldier experience in the military, where he felt like he was under remote control, like mind control, and wound up in Colombia running people over as part of like a distraction while the CIA was running some kind of black ops. And,
Wow.
and it just sounded so unbelievable, just absolutely incredible. And I was like, I was feeling very skeptical. And he goes, "Oh, by the way, I have video." And I was like, "Oh, well, we got to see that." And so he takes us to his Twitter page and he shows us this video of him in a hospital. Well, first in a police car and then in a hospital with blood running down his face. And I was like, "Oh man, that's so weird. It's such a weird thing to couple. How did he get this video? How does it fit in with the larger narrative?" And it was just so bizarre, all of it. But he goes by the name Johnny G is his porn name. But it's like, you're missing an opportunity here because of the super soldier background. You should really be called Jason Porn.
Oh man, and spell it that way too, right?
Yeah, right.
Wow.
But it was pretty wild tale. That's the one that I keep coming back to. That's one of the really interesting, fascinating opportunities you have when you have podcasts like these. Is people come and they share your stories, and while you're doing background, we really just kind of let it fly. It's
right, and there's nothing wrong with that either. For me, that's one reason I don't do any paranormal stories at all, because I have to verify it. And somebody says they saw a ghost or whatever. How do you verify that? So, and there are lots of shows doing paranormal stories and doing them very well. So I leave that to the experts, and I stick with the stuff that I can confirm actually happened.
Yeah, I wouldn't say we're experts by any means. But we have come across some very fascinating tales. At any rate, so you do a lot of background investigation. Tell me about that process. How does that work?
Well, that's one of the first things I tell people. When somebody pitches me a story, I reply with usually two questions. First is, can this story take 45 minutes to an hour to tell? Because something happened and, you can get the whole thing in 10 minutes, and that's not going to work for a podcast. So is it going to take at least 45 minutes to an hour to tell? And if it goes longer than that, I'm fine with that too. There's no such thing as too long, only too boring. And if it takes longer and it still holds the audience, that's fine. But the second question always is there a way that I can verify that this actually happened? And I always have the disclaimer. It's not because I'm questioning what you're telling me, but I promote each episode as being a true story, so I have to do my due diligence. And I've had people send me their personal medical reports and police reports, and it's easy. And it's easy if it was a story that made the news. There's going to be a news article about it somewhere with their name, and I can confirm it that way. So I don't try to confirm every detail of the story that they're gonna tell, but if someone, like, I had a woman who had just moved into a new house, and the first day that she was there, she's sitting by the window taking a break from unpacking, and right in the sidewalk was right in front of her house, and right there in the street a man was murdered, and she saw it happen. And that's easy enough to verify, because this happened several years ago, like maybe 20 years ago, but she went to the library, and on microfiche they had the newspaper article. She printed it, sent it to me, and they actually put people's names and addresses in the news stories back then. And so her name was there. And think about, the guy that committed this murder ran off. So he was still on the run.
At large.
Yeah. And the only witness to the murder, and it's her name and address right there in the paper. Okay. That scared her to death. She left. She didn't live there anymore. She told the landlord, "No way, I'm out of here."
Oh man.
So yeah, that was kind of scary.
Yeah, my wife is from Kansas, and she told me once that she rented an apartment. She told me the address, and then she's like, "Now watch this," and she pushes play on a documentary, and it says the same address that she was just telling me. And it was a BTK documentary.
Oh.
She's like, I lived in the apartment of one of the victims. I was like, whoa.
Wow.
Oh man, yeah, pretty
Man.
wild.
That's
Sometimes those stories do kind of touch really close. Yeah.
Yeah, especially one that's like that. I mean, everybody knows, that particular serial killer.
Mm-hmm.
I've actually spoken with his daughter. She's written a book now. I don't know if you know that or not, about her experience growing up with him and the day she found out when, the cops came to her door saying we've arrested your dad and all that stuff. So might have her on the show sometime.
Yeah, that's a good idea. Yeah, listening to his trial, the video and audio from his trial, just absolutely chilling.
Mm-hmm.
So as far as the vetting and the background and the research, how long does that take you before you record the episode?
There's quite a variation. Sometimes I can get it right off the bat. Other times, there's other elements of the show that sometimes we have to wait for. I've had a couple of episodes, like there was one where my guest was on a bus in New York City, and a man came on the bus with a knife and started slashing people. And my guest was one of the ones that got cut. And that man, the suspect was apprehended immediately, taken into custody. But we recorded the podcast, and then he said, "Okay, we really can't put it out yet. We can't let the story go live yet because he's in court, and we don't want the public information that comes out to sway the jury or to affect the outcome of the court proceedings." And that happened it was early on in COVID, like maybe April or May of 2020. And I still have not been able to put that episode out.
He's
because
still awaiting trial.
Yeah, well, it's every time I see a new date, I go online to where the court is the news is about the court proceedings in New York City, and it keeps everything keeps getting moved back. And moved back another month, another 2 months, and it just kept. Every time I check in, there's another 2 months gone. I got to come back and check again, and so now he's actually pled guilty. There was mental illness involved in this case, and so he has pled guilty. Now the delay now is just to determine the sentencing phase of it.
Sure.
So, but at least for the guest, it was been super frustrating for him waiting all this time, to get some kind of justice, and it's still not over. But hopefully, they're in the last stages of that. But yeah, that has taken a while. I've got another one, a woman in, where was she? She was Australia, I think, Australia or New Zealand, and she was with her husband in a car. They were driving. He was driving, and a teenage boy ran out in front of the car, and they ran into him. They hit him. He came up over the windshield, and for that one, we were able to do it, and we could put the episode out whenever. But I wanted to include the 911 audio. In their case, it's 999 audio. I wanted to include that because whenever I can include that, I like to, just because it puts the listener right there at the scene. I mean, there's no script involved. That's just live action. And but I couldn't request it because I'm in the U.S. This is a different country. So the guest actually had to request it, and they said, "Yeah, we can get it to you, but we got a long backup. There's a line of people waiting for other audio, so we'll get to it when we can." And it was probably 4 or 5 months before we finally got that. So now that I've got that, I can put that episode and put it together. So that's kind of a roundabout way of answering your question. How long does it take to put an episode together before we record? I usually have several pages of notes before I sit down and before we actually record, because I want to know the whole story, all the details, because it enables me, for the guest, I can serve up questions that I already know the answer to, but I know it's going to be a good aspect of the story, and it gives them a chance to answer the question and tell that part of it. So overall, I'm not sure about how much time it takes before we record, but overall, from the time I have an idea to the time the episode goes live typically is about 12 to 15 hours of work
Yeah.
to put that together.
Well, that's quite a bit of homework. For
Yeah.
12 to 15 hours for a 1 hour episode, that's pretty healthy prep work.
Yeah. But it's worth it to me, you know.
Yeah.
It's going to be up forever, and I want and most of that time is spent editing because I want my guest to sound as good as possible, and I want the audio quality to be good, and you know, everything to make sense in the story. And so I think for me, it's time well spent. I'd love to be able to outsource that to an editor, but I just can't see doing that, at least not at this point. But yeah, I think it's worth it.
Yeah, there's one thing about, I've been on a couple of shows, and one of them was American Ninja Warrior. I don't know if you've ever seen that show, but one of the things that really surprised me was the production aspect of it. When you watch it on TV, it's just an obstacle course competition, and they just roll from one competitor to the next, and the editing is really good, and it makes it so very seamless. And you know, they lead you to commercial in these very nice ways, but when you're there in the production, you're standing around all day waiting your turn, and it just takes forever. And there's all these things that watching the show you wouldn't know unless you had filmed the episodes before and knew about the production delays and things like that.
Right. They got to take out all the boring parts.
Yeah, exactly.
Right.
So there's that kind of behind the scenes thing that, you know, when you're not in front of the camera, that a lot of people just don't recognize or don't appreciate the type of work that goes into preparing an episode, and then editing and the post-production and all that stuff. And it can be a lot of work, you know, and you're putting in a lot of effort. So after all that work is complete and you put the episode out, you know, are you celebrating with some vegan spirits? Is that what's going on?
It's not time to celebrate yet when the episode goes live. There's still a lot of work to do because I promote each episode.
Yeah.
And I on episode release day, I post in about that particular episode in probably 50 to 60 Facebook groups, and I put it on Instagram and on my own Facebook profile, and I have a subreddit that I posted on there. And if it's a true crime episode, I'll post it in the true crime Facebook groups as well. And of course, I notify the guest that it's now live, and here's the link if you'd like to share it. And any other you know, voices that contributed to the audio, you know, let them know that it's live as well. And usually the guest is pretty excited to hear from me at that point, because I usually have several episodes recorded in advance, and I release an episode every other Friday. So from the time we record, it might be a month or two later before the episode actually goes live. And so they've kind of forgotten completely, you know, what our conversation was. So they're excited to listen to it again. And, you know, they're telling their friends about it. Hey, I'm on this podcast. Check it out. So yeah, it's a lot of work on release day too. And then I can celebrate.
So we do want to. I've got some people who are listening live right now, and they are interested in knowing what is the episodes, or you know, if you had like a top 3 episodes for them to check out and get them hooked in. What was that like? What would you direct them to?
It kind of depends on what they're looking for. I'm looking at my list of episodes here. That's why I'm looking off to the side. If you want a fun one, there's one called Fabiana Won the Price is Right Showcase. That's a fun one. If you want to have a good cry and be just blown away by a story.
Not while you're driving.
Not while you're driving. Nope. There's a more recent one that just came out in October called Laura's Pain Became Her Purpose. Let's see. Almost any topic. I've got so many different animal attacks. I've got Ella was trampled by an elephant. Dan was mauled by a grizzly bear. Somebody was attacked by a monkey. I've got an alligator attack in there. If you like hearing alligator or animal attacks, I've got several of those.
Is this the list right here?
Yeah, that list is alphabetical. So, like Aaron was he was over in Thailand when that big tsunami hit back in 2004. That's the first one, but that only comes up first because of they're sorted alphabetically by guest name. Yeah. So, yeah, they can look through that whole list, or if you look at the homepage of the website, you'll see the most recent ones. The most recent. This actually. The very first episode that I was talking about with Jen, who accidentally killed someone, this is one of the first episodes that I'm calling a flashback, where since that was 5 years ago, I replay that episode, and then I have an update with Jen saying, hey, what's happened in the last 5 years since we talked? What are you doing now? So I do that. I still have a regular new episode every other Friday, but I'm sticking one of these in between those once a month.
So some of these topics are pretty dark, pretty serious.
They are dark, yes.
How do you kind of decompress after a really dark episode like that?
I kind of try to. It's not easy. Some of these are emotional for me, just like they are, for the guest telling the story. But I guess I can kind of work it out in my mind that we're telling this story, but we're not telling the story just to exploit the shocking aspect of it or the shocking details. It's because of a more important purpose. Cammie, that was the shooting out in Las Vegas from a few years ago.
Yeah.
And that's the story right there. That was probably the most difficult. Laura's pain became her purpose. That's probably the most difficult episode that I've had to get through. So, and that has to do with children not surviving being left in a hot car. That's what happened with her. But that's not even the whole story. So you got to listen to that one. That's a tough one. But again, they all have a purpose. I don't just tell a sad story just to depress everyone. It's they all have a greater purpose, and the guest has a cause or a mission, that is driving them now to make that event, mean something.
Yeah, so all these episodes can be found at whatwasthatlike.com.
They can. That's the podcast website, but it's on any podcast app as well, including Spotify or any of them podcast apps that you just search for What Was That Like, and you'll see it come up.
All right. Well, Scott, thank you so much for joining us today. As we kind of wrap up, I will encourage all of our viewers and listeners to check out Scott's podcast at whatwasthatlike.com. Found on Spotify and all the major platforms.
Oh, every major, yeah, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, any of the podcast apps.
Apple Podcast, Spotify, Amazon, iHeartRadio, Pocket Casts, Reddit, Facebook, TikTok, Patreon, Instagram, all of those big ones. Podchaser, Radio Public, Google Play. Take a look. Scott's got some great episodes out there that will have you feeling things deeply. And if you're driving, you will cry and get in an accident. So be careful.
That's honestly, that's what really drives me is getting to. I don't like superficial conversations. I like to get to the real, raw emotion and talk about something really deep, and that's what this podcast is.
Yeah, I love talking about superficial. That's where I live. Let's
All
keep
right.
everything surface level, you know?
Like, hey, did you watch the game last night? Yeah. Okay.
Just absolute meaningless dribble. Yeah, that's where I live.
Well, there's an audience for every show, right?
No, we also enjoy getting to the meat of the substance and trying to get. We just want stories. We like when people tell their stories and share the strange things that happen to them. You know, that's kind of what we're after. But Scott, thank you so much for joining us and sharing these wonderful tales with us.
My pleasure.
And for our listeners, if you will check out Scott's podcast, let him know how you feel about it. How do people submit their own stories to you?
Right on the website, there's a link where you can submit your story. And I can't necessarily respond to all of them because I get a lot of submissions, but I definitely read every one of them.
I'm going to share that screen real quick. So this is the Your Story tab on the website.
Yep.
And how you can submit your story. Now, if you want to talk about paranormal, you come here, but don't go to Scott. He's gonna turn it down. But yeah, anybody who's interested in sharing their stories on Scott's podcast, here's how you do it. And I'm sure that there will be lots of viewers of our podcast who are interested in sharing their tales.
I'd love to hear from them. Even if they just listen to an episode or two, I'd love to hear what they think of it.
Very good. Make sure that you, for our live viewers, thank you so much for sharing your thoughts in the chat. We appreciate all of you. It is always a wonderful conversation, and the live chat always enriches things. We had viewers, Absolute Geek Podcast, Mojo Quid, Ferdbird the Nerd, and Derek Galloway. Thank you guys all for tuning in and sharing your thoughts during the podcast. And Ronnie's tuning in right now. Thank you for jumping in the chat real quick. Make sure you like, comment, and subscribe. And until next time, keep on exploring the edges of the unknown.